As a program, once a month, our staff have lunch and learn events to hear from an expert or panel on a topic about equity. The program has decided to host one and invite the public to listen in. Seeing as it's Black History Month, we have a special panel for you tonight consisting of people who are a part of the program and are an expert in their field. Tonight's panelists are here to share their lived and professional experiences on the topic. I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves and then pick someone else to go next. We'll start with our program administrator, Greg Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Greg Johnson. I'm the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Administrator. This is my 39th year doing transportation projects. I am a civil engineer by training and have worked for now 4 DOTs across the country. I've been in the private sector, but one of the issues that has always animated my career is being a part of changing how African Americans interact with infrastructure. I've always been the one who sits in the living rooms to talk to different people and make sure they understand how the infrastructure improvement will impact their day-to-day lives, how they can become involved, and how companies can be a part of reaping some of the benefits rather than just feeling the impacts of programs. So this has been my calling from day one of being in the infrastructure business. But that's the reason why I am here, and that's the reason why I am the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Administrator. So next, I'd like to go to Jonell Bell.
Well, thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. As Greg indicated, my name is Jonell Bell, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Principal Equity Officer for the IBR program, which is a role really designed to advance equity throughout the whole program. I'm also founder and president of Espousal Strategies, which is one of the local DBE firms working on an IBR. So looking forward to this discussion, and thank you all for the participation.
And next we'll go to Dr. Roberta Hunte.
Hello, my name is Dr. Roberta Hunte. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the facilitator of the Equity Advisory Group and a consultant around issues of equity and Black community participation in projects, and a professor at Portland State University.
Thank you, Dr. Hunte. Now we'll go to Commissioner JoAnn Hardesty.
Good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of the program. As the Portland Bureau of Transportation Commissioner, I am knee-deep in both the IBR project as well as the Rose Quarter and the 82nd Avenue Improvement Project. We have billions of dollars that are coming into the Portland metro area that will make a significant impact in our community. And my role is to make sure that we all benefit and we all suffer equally when it comes to the kind of changes that must be made to create a more equitable, fair, and just city.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Now we'd like to hear from Ed Washington.
Hello, my name is Ed Washington, and I am the chair, one of the chairs. There are 2 co-chairs, one for the state of Oregon and one for the state of Washington. I represent the state of Oregon, and our job is to bring all of the various different groups together, collect their input, use their input for decisions that will be made on the bridge, and it covers everything from disability to how people get across the bridge. You know, there's all different types of interests. But I think one of the things that really brought me to this project when they asked is that I was very fortunate to have served on the Metro Council for almost 10 years. And I remember it's probably about a year after I was on the Metro Council that I was invited to go to a meeting that was held over in the Vancouver barracks. And the purpose of that committee was to study putting in a new interstate bridge. And that was back in the 1990s. And so, when the other one didn't get through, I just felt that this was a good opportunity for me to continue a little bit. And we really do have an excellent group of citizens that we work with on both sides of the river. And plus we have to work with all the elected officials at the state level, the city level. So it's very exciting and it's lots of work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Washington. And now Jasmine Tolbert.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Tolbert. I use she, her pronouns. And
You're there.
okay, just wondering, the little box popped up. I currently am the president for the Vancouver NAACP branch, and professionally, I serve as the Human Resources Director for YWCA Clark County. So definitely here to, as part of the Bridge program, to advocate for the communities that I advocate for the most. But also I'm someone that uses the bridge occasionally, and I'm someone that has family that uses it. And I just understand how much this bridge is access to so many different things. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for having me for this conversation.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. So again, my name is Millicent Williams. I'm serving as your facilitator for tonight, but I'm also the facilitator for the executive steering group for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. What that means is I work with the partners that you see on the screen, as well as partners who aren't represented here tonight, to cause us to get to a solution, to help us to determine how we are going to prioritize the things that are important and make decisions about those that will serve the interests of everyone that would be impacted by the bridge. And so I'm excited about the opportunity. That's part of my role as I'm here in the city of Portland. I also work for a firm called OTAC, and it's a local architectural and engineering firm. And we are focused on ensuring that we're doing the right things for the communities that we're seeking to serve. And so it's exciting to be a part of this program. It's most especially exciting to be a part of this conversation because we recognize that transportation infrastructure and the investments that have been made in the space have often affected communities in different ways. And we're going to talk today about how we have seen transportation and its impacts have effects on us individually, as people who are traversing the cities that we live in, as a community, as we represent bodies of communities that are impacted by the work that we see being done. And in many ways as advocates around how we are going to ensure that this work moves forward in a meaningful way. As a reminder, for the participants, not just that you see on the screen, but for those who will potentially want to be engaged in the conversation as we move throughout the course of the evening, we are going to be centering Black voices today. And with the short time that we have just under 90, we have 75 minutes left. We'll try to get to the questions that some of you have submitted. Thank you for doing that via email when you registered. For participants in the Zoom room, please use the Q&A feature to submit your question. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you should see it there. If you're using a mobile device, you should click the More button and you'll be able to access the opportunities to submit your feedback in that way. We'll now go to our first question of the night. And the way that we'll approach this is we'll do a bit of a round robin, kind of in the order that we started with the introductions. I might mix it up a little bit, but we want to make sure that we're hearing a varied set of responses because again, the lived experiences are helping to inform the way that this conversation is able to move forward. And we want to make sure that we're hearing all of those perspectives. So our first question, what does infrastructure and what do infrastructure projects mean for you personally in your life? And I'm talking about your lived experience, shaping that experience, building communities, and building through them. So we'll start with you, Greg.
So I have, once again, I've been in the transportation business 39 years. And I've seen the benefits that can come from a well-crafted, well-balanced transportation system. And having a voice in what that looks like for different communities is tremendously important to me. I think that during the building of the interstate system, a number of African-American communities across the country were impacted in so many negative ways. So knowing that history and being inside the DOT world, it is personal to me. When I was 4 years old, one of my earliest memories is of my family being moved 3 different times because we were relocated by the then Michigan Highway Department because they were making room for a infrastructure improvement, building a road where our house once stood. So I was too young to understand, but my father told me that story just about every time I saw him. And when I went into the DOT world, he reminded me of my responsibility to make sure that people were treated fairly and treated respectfully. So this is personal to me. And once again, I can name the different communities around the country. You can go to Black Bottom in Detroit, Albina in Portland. You can go to the east side of Baltimore, or rather the west side of Baltimore. All of these places have a history of how infrastructure impacted them and changed the course of lives. So it's important for African Americans to be involved and take their fate in their hands rather than have others make decisions for them. So that's one of the reasons why I am in Portland, because of the importance of this project and making sure that equity and African American voices are heard in the discussion.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, you mentioned that the problem that we see existing here, I'm sorry, it's a motorcycle outside doing some things. The problem that we're trying to address here as it relates to the bridge and other projects in the region are a reflection of the need to be responsive to things that we've seen happen all over the country, especially to communities of color, marginalized communities. When someone says, you know, this is happening in Portland, you can name any city in any major city in the country just about and have a similar experience. And so what's exciting about working on this project is the opportunity to change the narrative and to ask and answer the question, what next? And so with that in mind, I'd like to hear from Commissioner Hardesty, or Dr. Hardesty, about your thoughts about that, given that I know that you are on a daily basis grappling with issues that speak specifically to that.
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to start where Greg did. As a kid, I remember us being moved because of a need in Baltimore, Maryland, to build a freeway through my neighborhood. And what I have lived through has been government projects that totally disregarded the lived experience and the expertise of Black communities. What we all know is that normally freeway projects destroy low-income and Black communities with no regard for who makes money and who actually benefits from the project that's built. And we have way too many examples of that all over the country. I see my role in this project is really making sure that the federal government is better than they think they can be. Because when you think about federal contract dollars and federal dollars to build things, they have a very low expectation about how you support minority businesses. I see my role in this project as making sure that there's as many construction dollars going to Black-owned firms as there are to other firms. Traditionally, that has not been the case with federal construction projects. In addition, it's important for me that we center the community that's going to be most impacted by this project for the years of construction, as well as what happens afterwards when cars are being devoted into communities. which is why I'm really committed to making sure that at the end of the day, there are multimodal transportation options for all the people who need to use the Interstate Bridge in order to work, play, or worship in either of the two states.
Thanks, Commissioner Hardesty. And so you speak to that multimodality, which we recognize is incredibly important as we're working to ensure that all communities are well served. I'm interested in hearing what Jasmine Tolbert from the NAACP in Vancouver has to say, because what the bridge is proposing, or what the overall bridge program is proposing, reflects some potential opportunities for growth as it relates to multimodality in the state of Washington. So I'd like to hear from you about infrastructure and infrastructure projects and how they are affecting you personally and the community that you're seeking to serve.
Yes, absolutely. I'll start with the personal piece. When I think of just this bridge alone and the infrastructure that it changes in our community, I instantly think of the way that folks in my generation are trying to figure out where they're going to work, whether they're going to stay in our community, and I think that transcends against many communities as well. But specifically, the pickings are slim when you're trying to figure out how much of my life needs to be oriented around travel time. And I know that when I had first, I'm a graduate of WSU Vancouver, and loving this area and having the opportunity to have grown up here, but it's like, oh no, do I want to battle that bridge every day? Am I going to be staying in Vancouver, or do I want to move to Portland so it's a little bit easier so I don't have to cross the bridge if I want to find something in my career? And so personally for me, that's the lens that I'm consistently looking through. But then when I look at the communities I serve, when you look at just like the environmental factors of just really the fourth plane corridor and things that have been done in that area that are not healthy for the communities that live there. And so you think about a huge infrastructure piece like the bridge going in, who was being affected by that? Who lives near this bridge? Who, as Greg and JoAnn both brought up, who may be displaced by this bridge? And that's what I'm looking at the most by serving on the community advisory group, but then also outside of being displaced, but really what access is being brought to it. And I think of last night's meeting where we're thinking of who are the folks that are riding public transit that will be most affected in these groups. And I do appreciate, though, how this project is trying to center that as much as possible and consistently brings it up. And I'm encouraged, but also motivated to serve in a deeper way to ensure that we keep that motivation all the way through.
Thanks so much. So you speak to the effects to community and the long-standing effects to community and those choices that people are going to have to make as relates to what they'll do to move about. And the bridge project is not just a project. It's really, it is a program, and there's a program area. And I'm interested in hearing from Ed Washington about both his lived experience, his extensive experience in moving communities forward here in Oregon, and his sentiments about what not just the bridge project, but the bridge program means for, or could mean for, the community that we're living in.
Thank you very much. You know, with regards to the issue of moving communities forward here in Portland, I'm going to reflect back. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm going to share a little bit about Alabama, but I'm going to talk about Portland first. And when my family moved here in 1944, we lived in Vanport, and because that was the only place we could live where there was enough housing for people during the height of the Second World War. And Vanport, all of you probably know that Vanport was destroyed by a flood in 1948, May of 1948. And so at that point, my family was dislocated from, I remember the very first night after the flood, we lived in a school. And then from there, we moved and lived in a church. And then from the church, we moved down on Swan Island. And then from Swan Island, we moved over and spent a horrible winter of 1948 and 49 living in trailers. And by the early 1950s, my family was located, we were living on North Interstate. And I think that's when I saw one of the first dislocation. Most people probably don't realize, but down close to where the grain elevators are, which is, and very, very close to where the City Water Bureau's office is, they built the first flyway over Interstate Avenue in 1949. And I remember that, and I remember it for one bad reason, because there was a cave in there and a worker was killed. But you know, when they, from there and looking at the area of Albina, particularly where the Coliseum is, and just briefly, you know, the African-American community lived in downtown Portland back in the late 1800s up until 1930, and they were displaced out of the downtown area, and not necessarily by a bridge or a highway, but just general infrastructure. And they were relocated over to where the Coliseum is, and then from the Coliseum, they were really relocated up in the area of what we call Albina, up around Emmanuel Hospital. So there was this huge dislocation there by the hospital. And then right on the heels of the hospital, there was further dislocation with I-5 coming through. So, you know, I remember all of those things, but I think I've been doing some work on my family's history and back in Birmingham, Alabama. So I have access to ancestry.com, and I went on based on all of the addresses that I have of my relatives that where they lived in Vanport. And the first time, in Birmingham, and the first time I visited Birmingham was in like 1984. And the African-American community where my family lived was still very much intact. I went back 20 years later, and it's gone because it was replaced by a freeway. And I did further research on my family and found that practically all of the houses where my family lived in Birmingham were replaced by improvements, you know, flood improvements or just people wanting more land. One of our houses is sitting where a McDonald's stand is located now. Another one was located in the middle of the street. So, you know, it's this dislocation. And so I think when I met Greg Johnson for the first time and heard his stories about how those things have impacted our communities. And I think every African-American person, not everyone, but a large percentage of us, but those experiences are very, very similar. So working on the Interstate Bridge, I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to serve on the Metro Council. So I learned a lot about how that infrastructure worked. I was one of the leading people on the Interstate Light Rail. And I'm telling you, when you're working on those issues, they're tough. They're really tough, and you don't always have full control of those things. So I just feel that based on what has been taking place with the IBR project, I'm very pleased with it, because at least I think they're listening to people and trying to make sure that they include as many diverse populations as well as the general population in coming to a decision that hopefully will benefit us all.
Thanks so much. So it's good to hear you say that from the community advisory group standpoint. And now I'd like to hear from Dr. Hunte, who facilitates, as she mentioned, the equity advisory group. I know that you'll have plenty of insights to share, not just about the work that you're doing, but your reflections on infrastructure and its impact on you specifically.
Thank you. You know, I think maybe I'll say what as a facilitator for the Equity Advisory Group, what I see that is unique about the work that we're doing is bringing people who represent different organizations and different communities and their expertise around how best to serve the communities that they represent to the table around this project. And also having these groups weigh in on what is when we're screening ideas, when we're screening design options, what what's the criteria to use that would both benefit and support. This is my beloved child, Rumi, who's like really adorable, and
should be a part of the conversation.
And should be part of the conversation. And I think one of the things that I think about in relation to this bridge project, and in relation to the conversations that we're having around equity and defining what we mean by equity and what that looks like going forward, is I think about for my child, and yes, your skills are great. Stop it. For my child, and okay, away. That's why I locked the door. For my child and future generations, this bridge needs to make their lives better, right? Like it can't be, it can't displace people, and it can't contribute to the climate burden that our children and our future generations will inherit. And so I think what I value about the equity advisory group, the community advisory group, the real thought that the ODOT and the WSDOT side are doing around bringing complicated voices to the table and being accountable to those voices, because highways have not. And we have this opportunity to do that. And I'm excited to be part of that. I think that is groundbreaking. And I really echo Commissioner Hardesty in saying, pushing the federal government to do more than it thinks it can, because this is one of the largest investments that has ever happened in our region. So the reality is we have so much opportunity to make change, lasting change for the better. That's my
Thanks,
thought.
Dr. Hunt. Yeah, that's the theme that I think we should all both wake up and go to bed with as we're working on this project. You know, how are we going to push the system to work in ways that it thinks it can't when we believe that it can, and really cause the change that we believe needs to happen. So Jonell, as you work really closely with Dr. Hunt and everyone that's on this call, what are your thoughts about this project and infrastructure work in general, and how we can use this moment as a catalyst to advance a number of things that are important for our community?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. And it's just wonderful to hear all the answers. I think what's clear is sort of the thread that ties us all together. And one of the main threads is how infrastructure has failed Black communities. My grandparents moved here during World War II to work on the Kaiser shipyards, helping to build the Liberty ships, and lived in Vanport. And that's exhibit A of what happens when you have failed infrastructure, and how Black communities in particular, but also a lot of white communities in that perspective were failed. And the reality is, in order for us to advance equity in a program of this scale, we have to really understand how infrastructure in these types of projects have failed communities of color. And so I think the opportunity that lies ahead, and I think it's the once in a generation opportunity that lies ahead, is how do we leverage this project, the IBR, to help get folks from poverty to prosperity? And what does that really mean? Well, it means a few things, one of which is, how do we ensure that we're setting new standards, as Commissioner Hardesty has indicated, in hiring persons with disabilities, people of color, women, in jobs that we know will pay significantly well. We have new opportunities under the Biden-Harris administration to be able to hire by zip codes. Wouldn't it be great if we hired first and instructed our contractor to first hire folks from areas where low-income folks and people of color have been displaced to? So that's number one, economic opportunity. The second piece is around our minority and women-owned businesses. We have an opportunity of not only curating and creating new businesses, but significantly growing the businesses that we have here locally. This project will be in upwards of $3-4 billion, potentially more. I think our measurement has to not be whether or not we were successful in having great engineering relative to concrete and steel. I think we would have failed if that's our only measure. In my view, I think our measure has to be how many lives have we changed? How many folks have we moved from poverty to prosperity? What generational wealth have we created? And so there's just such a great economic opportunity. And for me, that's what this project represents. And I think ultimately history will judge us based on whether or not we hit that bar.
Thanks so much. Really important points that you've shared, Jonell. This is, as I've indicated, much more than just about a bridge, but it's about what happens as the bridge is being built and then after the bridge has been built, in support of communities, and specifically BIPOC communities, specifically the Black community, who, as everyone has mentioned, has seen some sort of fracture because of the way that transportation infrastructure has impacted them in not just one place. And this is 5 people. 5 people have talked to you about how they personally have been impacted, how they personally have been displaced, in some instances multiple times. And so if we're not just making an emotional plea, we're making a really practical and humanitarian plea about what this bridge really can be and what it can represent. And so my hope is that as we continue to advance the conversation on all of the components of the bridge, that we're really thoughtful about how we're engaging, who we're listening to, what those voices are sharing with us, and how we're using that to really inform those next steps. It's not just about the steel girders, it's about so much more. And so I'm excited about getting into more of that conversation. So we're going to move on to the next question. It's a 2-parter, and I'm going to split up the group to kind of mix it up a little bit. And Jonell, since I see you're right there, I'm going to ask you first, and then we'll go to Greg and then Dr. Hunt. What are some of the things, and you mentioned some of them, what are some of the things that you see the Interstate Bridge program doing now that sets it apart from programs like it in other parts of the country, or programs that we've attempted to address even here in this region? What sets it apart?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. A number of things, and I won't filibuster here because I know we want to get to others. But the first is the creation of an equity advisory group that Dr. Roberta Hunte does such a wonderful job facilitating. We have a cross section of individuals from both Oregon and Washington, many of whom are equity practitioners, working with us inside the tent to ensure that this program really advances equity, both in terms of process as well as an outcome. The second thing is we develop a specific definition as to what does equity mean to this program. And we did that by first assessing all of the definitions in the region of our regional partners. And then the equity advisory group developed a specific definition that becomes the way by which we measure all of our progress. The third thing is the program administrator, Greg Johnson, has agreed and has made a commitment to advance a community benefits agreement. We have an opportunity in this community benefits agreement to determine what do we do with ancillary property that might be made available relative to the project. Perhaps there are opportunities for affordable housing with some of those parcels. How do we set new targets for women and people of color and persons with disabilities? We know that this corridor has a higher concentration of persons with disabilities than anywhere in the region. It would be unconscionable if we did not set high employment targets, workforce targets on this project relative to that. That's something that we can do in the community benefits agreement. And the last thing is just in terms of our the way in which we are proactively doing analysis. We are looking at equity data to determine and allowing that data to help us make decisions. We all talk a lot in this region about an equity lens, and there are very few folks doing it. And what we are really striving to do is to unpack the stories of the folks who are living in this region. For example, Clark County has, in recent census, the fastest growth of persons of color in our region are now in Clark County. And so what does that mean in terms of folks commuting, perhaps moving to Clark County for more affordable housing, but still traveling to Oregon for job access? And so to rebuild this bridge is really, you can make a strong argument, is an equity concern. So those are some of the things that we're working on.
Thanks so much, Jonell. I'm certain that Administrator Johnson will be able to expound on what you've shared, Jonell. What to you, given your perspective and oversight, do you see that the bridge program is doing that sets it apart?
So I think there are, once again, a number of unique aspects, and Jonell touched on a number of them, but having a focus on both equity and climate is tremendously different for DOTs. And both the Oregon DOT and Washington State DOT have empowered me to say, yeah, we are centering these elements as we go forward. And this is new for the DOTs. The DOTs have been late to the dance as far as equity concerns are involved. But both of these DOTs have embraced the concept and understand the history. So that is unique. And having worked for, I said, this is now my fourth DOT to work for, it's different. And we are pushing the envelope and making sure that voices are heard and that concerns about climate. We have reached out to the youth who will be living with this bridge for years beyond folks of my age. So these are different things that I've not seen in my career. And I've seen a lot of large projects and a lot of different outreach techniques, but this program is unique in that way.
Thank you so much. You'd think after 2 years, I'd remember to keep my mute button on or off, but I had to find my mute button. So thanks so much, Administrator Johnson. Those differences are meaningful, and I'd like to hear from Dr. Hunte. She mentioned some of the things that were important, but how do you see this program advancing in a different way relative to work that you've done in other communities or even in this community?
Well, I think one of the big ways is that as we are thinking about equity and climate, the decision on what the bridge will be hasn't been made yet. And so bringing these voices from communities of color, from people with disabilities, from just a wide swath of folks have been weighing in on design options. I think that is a big deal. And I haven't seen that happen at the time of design before, right? So that excites me. I think the fact that we're having a conversation, and not just a conversation, right? A planning around equity and climate before we decide what we're going to do, it gives me, I think issues of community benefits agreements and workforce equity and whatnot on like the who builds the bridge. All of that is a great concern for me. But to be able to weigh in on what that actually looks like, what the bridge itself actually looks like, and the impact that that bridge has on our broader environmental footprint and societal footprint is huge. So it's the piece around workforce as well as the piece around how are all beings being impacted by the development of this project.
Really insightful thoughts. Thank you for that. Sorry that I muted myself again, trying to keep any disruptions down to a minimum, but really thank you for the sentiments that you bring to the conversation, Dr. Hunt. So the second part of the question is a continuation of the first part, but it takes it into a little bit of a different direction. And I'm going to ask Jasmine and then Ed and then Commissioner Hardesty, what do you hope to see with this program that you haven't seen yet? What do you hope that it can do that you've not seen identified as of yet?
Well, it's hard, I will say, first of all, to identify things that we haven't seen quite yet, especially after that first round of answers. But I really want to emphasize not just the economic impacts that this will have of folks being able to have easier access to jobs and having just a wider variety of employers to choose from. But I also really want to emphasize the relationships that this bridge helps maintain, those interpersonal relationships, those friends that you have across the bridge, those family members that you have across the bridge. All of those items are also things that keep folks here and present in our community. And the more barriers and the more that we limit access to folks being able to do that very thing of connecting with one another, also impacts whether or not they want to stay in Southwest Washington in the Portland area. And so I would say that the one thing that we may not have touched based on too much, because we do kind of stay in a pretty for lack of a better term, kind of capitalist mindset of the positive impacts this bridge will bring. I just want to make sure that we are also focusing on the really just kind of down to earth caring pieces that this will bring. And that's really a lot of access to our loved ones and our family members across the bridge and being able to quickly gain access to them as well. If I were to think of things that weren't already highlighted very well, might I say.
Really good points. I think the bridge serves as not just a physical connection between two states and two communities, but an emotional connection for many and a familial connection. And so it will be important that we build it and that it's built strong and that it allows for that free movement of folks who are trying to reach each other in an effort to knit things back together that perhaps have been pulled apart by progress, as folks might call it. So Ed, Mr. Washington, what are some of your thoughts about what you want to see that you haven't seen? If we could make a list, which I'm making, what would we put on that? You're on mute.
I'd just like to talk a little bit about probably some things that we don't see, or really don't think about. And I think most people just perhaps maybe view the bridge as this big, large steel structure that they get on and go across, gets them to Seattle and other kinds of places, back and forth, visit friends in Vancouver. But, you know, first off, the bridge has to be safe. And I think that one of the things that I was just amazing is the amount of work that they put into it in terms of earthquake proof. You know, if the bridge were to go down, we would all be in bad shape. I mean, the bridge is a necessity. But I think that from the Citizen Advisory Group, one of the things that impresses me the most, and I think that that group sort of lets us know what they really want to see. And I think people forget that, you know, a lot of people will be walking across the bridge, but there are also a lot of people that can't walk across the bridge. They may have to go across the bridge in a wheelchair. There are people that are interested on the bridge in terms of bicycles. One gentleman came to us, he was transporting veterans from up at the VA hospital between Barnes and the VA hospital in Portland. And he was saying, just want to make sure that if, for instance, there's a charge, how do we make that a fair and equitable charge for people that are on limited income? So I think that there's just a lot of things that you really don't think about. But I just think that the Citizen Advisory Committee is a well-rounded group of people from all different walks of life, and access on and off the bridge. We have to deal with the people on Hayden Island. How do they get back and forth? And traffic coming in down Marine Drive. So you think it's pretty simple, and you think it's really pretty cut and dried, and it is not. And so I think that those kinds of things that I'm interested in is, number one, safety, pedestrian access, bicycle access, even skateboard access. People want to know, will they be able to skateboard across? So people want to jog across the bridge. So all of those kinds of things come up. And I think the bridge, through our committee, all of those issues are and will be addressed. So that's the surprise to me, that you just sort of think it's a place that you hop in your car and fly across and fly back, but it's a lot deeper than that. And it's a lot more comprehensive than that.
Sure. Yeah, really, really so many opportunities if we think about it more in more ways than one. So thank you for those observations. Commissioner Hardesty, I'm sure you have a list of things that you want to make sure that this project addresses, and I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say.
Well, Ed Washington started where I wanted to start off. He actually commented, if in fact people who've been pushed out either to the numbers in East Portland or have been pushed out to Vancouver because the cost of living is so exorbitant in the city of Portland, I think people are shocked constantly. I know I was when I found out that the median family income for a family of four in the Portland metro area today is $96,900. And for folks who are unaccustomed to median income, that means half the people make more and the other half make less. I will tell you personally, I've never made over that until I was elected to the city council. And so what I know is people who work in our school cafeterias, people who work in our restaurants, our sport or music venues, none of those people can afford to live in the city of Portland today. So for me, I am very committed to making sure we're not exacerbating the cost burden that low-income Portlanders are already experiencing. And I want to make sure that we are being intentional about actually not, no discount, no like low income. We actually exempt people who have been economically pushed out of the city from any economic responsibility for the new bridge. I also want to make sure that at the end of the day, we have created somewhere between 500 and 1,000 new businesses owned and operated by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. What I know is that federal contracts never even ask you to actually have any people of color or women or anybody that's not an emerging small business. And because of what we talked about around the community benefits agreement, we have the ability to actually set standards that will be required for anyone to work on the projects that we will be permitting through the city of Portland for this I-5 bridge. In addition, for me, the top priority is safety, climate mitigation, and equity. So every proposal that comes in front of me, I will be weighing it on who benefits, who doesn't, and those three issues. Is it safety? But I want to be really clear. My goal is to reduce people's use of single vehicle travel miles in the city of Portland. I don't want to hide the fact that I want people out of their cars. But the only way we can get people out of their automobiles is to make sure that we have multimodal transportation options for the people who need it most. And if we build a system based on the people who need it most, those with the most options will still have the most options. This should be a full employment act for anybody that is in high school today in the city of Portland. If we're not taking kids right out of high school into pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship and then journeyman status, and then helping them apply to start their own business, I will say this project is a colossal failure, because what I have seen over and over and over again is promises of equity. And equity is just a new buzzword, right? It's been affirmative action, it's been inclusion. I mean, every decade we have a new buzzword, but I can tell you the outcomes have not changed in a generation. And so for me, this project is a generational project that must create generational wealth for the community that has been most impacted by this project, but by past transportation projects and these projects. And with $10 billion potentially in transportation projects coming through the Portland metro area, just in the next 5 to 7 years, we have the best opportunity we've had in a generation to make sure we're intentional. And so as long as I have a breath in my body, that will be my focus, to ensure that we don't just talk about equity, because we talk about affirmative action and that didn't work well. Let me say the city of Portland has 12 failed programs that are supposed to benefit minority and women-owned programs. And I keep saying, why do we keep having those programs when they're all a colossal failure? The state system is a colossal failure. When you have people that have been emerging small businesses for 25 years. And so we have the opportunity to totally just ignore what has been normal and actually do what is just, right, and fair for the most amount of people in our communities who've been harmed by these projects for generations.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. And that really does lead us into the next question. So I don't want you to go too far, because you talked about the areas where there have been challenges and failures and opportunities for improvement. What are some of the ways that we can reduce some of the barriers that I think we both know keep people from being able to access the opportunities? What are some of the ways that you believe that we could reduce some of those barriers to make those accessible, to provide the training, to set people up for success? Do you have thoughts? And then I'm going to ask that Jonell and Administrator Johnson join in on that.
Let me just say, I got a couple of thoughts on that. So everything matters who the next governor of Oregon is. And so in your community, as people are telling you who they are and why they want to be your governor, I hope every community member will ask people where they stand on this project. How will they fight for communities that have been left out of the economic opportunities in this state? And are they willing to go to bat with us to make sure that we're not just talking about equity, but we actually are having equitable outcomes? That I say would be, everyone should be involved in that conversation right now. Because honestly, I am terrified of some folks who could be governor coming in and actually disrupting what I think has been a very inclusive, intentional process up until this point. But as you know, new legislature, new governor, a lot of things could change in Oregon in a very short period of time.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Jonell.
All right, and sorry, my light just went off 1 second here. Okay.
Okay.
And you were breaking up a little, so if you wouldn't mind, repeat the question, please.
Sure. Give me 1 second to get back to that. It was, what do we think we could work with the program to identify, in ways to identify the barriers that people have, and how can we work to address those and perhaps dismantle those barriers that especially BIPOC individuals and business owners have in terms of breaking into the opportunities that we believe will be on deck for us?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question. A lot of barriers are capacity. I mean, that's one of the most significant barrier, as well as because this will be a federally funded project, there will be a significant emphasis on DBE, which of course is disadvantaged business enterprise designation. And that's not an easy thing to obtain. And so part of what's going to be required is really going out and working with minority-owned, women-owned firms to get them DBE certified so that they will be ready when we are starting to advance contracting opportunities. The other barrier, Commissioner Hardesty indicated this, we do not have enough workers in our region to build this project. And if we don't want to be bringing in folks from California or other states, we need to have an aggressive effort to get high schools engaged in our pre-apprentice as well as apprenticeship programs to really have a full press court around educating young people as to the types of careers within building a project of this magnitude. So we have a real significant opportunity of really training the next generation of workers. And so that continues to be a significant barrier. I look forward to us using some best practices that have been deployed across the nation to also ensure that folks with records are afforded an opportunity of having a fresh start, a new start in developing career opportunities on this program as well. And so we ought not let the criminal justice system be a barrier as well.
Thanks so much, Jonell. Administrator Johnson.
So one of the things that I've seen throughout my career regarding small businesses, African-American owned business, women-owned businesses, is the lack of access to information, to the knowledge of when and what. So one of the things that we're hoping to do differently is reach out to the DBE communities, to the small businesses, and make them aware of the opportunities that are going to be available. Making sure that we right-size contracts so the contracts aren't so big that small businesses, African-American owned business, can't see themselves doing a part of it. So those type of techniques, breaking projects down into smaller segments and allowing folks to bring their expertise to the table and not solely relying on low bid to win work are important facets of opening doors for minority-owned businesses, for women-owned businesses to participate in projects, mega projects like the Interstate Bridge. So those are the things that we're going to be looking forward to talking about in community benefits discussions.
Thanks so much, Administrator Johnson. So
Excuse me, Millicent, could I just add one quick piece? Because Jonell mentioned that he works to get folks state certified with the ESB program. And I have just the opposite approach. I ignore the ESB and just say, we should not be focused on giving majority contractors additional points. What we should be focused on is really getting those contracts in the hands of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, right? I don't want to support a system that has failed Black folks forever. And the state system has been a colossal failure. So I don't tell people anymore to become certified, because Black people give the state all this information and it only benefits white majority business owners, right? And so we have to push back against a system that has failed us for generations, and not just keep encouraging people to reinforce a failed process. I hope Jonell, and I know he will, because he and I have this conversation all the time, I hope he will join me in the next legislative session to demand the legislature actually revise their contracting program, because it has never served out Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. It's only benefited white majority contractors. And I think we have to stop pretending that it actually serves anybody other than the people who already are the status quo contractors.
That's a really salient point. Jonell, did you want to respond?
Yeah, no, I agree with Commissioner Hardesty that the ESB program, which is the Emerging Small Business Program, has not served communities of color well. Commissioner, I was referring to the DBE program, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, which because this is federally funded, there will be targets. And so the challenge, Commissioner, as you know, so many of our minority firms are not certified in the DBE certification because it's very onerous. And in order for folks to gain access to those federal contracts, which of course is a national program, we have a lot of work to break down those barriers to get folks certified. But Commissioner, I'm 100% there with you. I think the ESB program has failed so many of our communities. And as we know, when we desegregate the data, there aren't a lot of folks of color actually in the ESB program.
And I can tell you, there's zero, almost zero at the city of Portland when you think about Black contractors. And we have, that's why I say we have 12 failed programs. And so what I hope is, especially with the magnitude of the investment, is that we force folks outside of the little narrow box that we've lived in for generations, because it hasn't worked for our communities. It works to actually take wealth out of our communities and not help us build generational wealth. And the last thing I want to say before I turn it back over to Millicent is that, in addition, if there's any public land created, it should be put in a permanent public land trust so that it is always affordable for the community that has been impacted by the development.
Really a really good conversation, and one that I know you and I have had as well, Commissioner Hardesty, as we have worked to see projects through to completion. And your questions about not just are they MWDESB HIJKLMNOP, but which of the alphabet are they? Who's represented in those numbers? And how are we going to make sure that the investments that are going back into communities really does actually make an impact? Your references to 1% and 2% of a $12 million project really, at the end of the day, does not amount to much, especially after you've had to pay staff and pay all of the fees for bonding and all of the other things. So there is a lot of work that we can do to help to prepare businesses to take advantage of the opportunities. But to your point, there are things that need to be changed at the legislative level to ensure that there is an accounting for that, the way that folks are showing up, and that it is not further disadvantaging those folks who've already been disadvantaged by the process. So that's really good. I'm hoping we can get back into that at a different point, and I'm sure that either through the EAG or the CAG conversations we'll be able to do that. But one of the things that has been raised kind of in this conversation is about transit, and this is a question that came in from one of the folks who's on the line right now. I'm not sure if we'll see them or if I'm going to be asking the question. I'm going to assume I'm going to ask the question. It's about high capacity transit. And I'm going to start with you, Greg. High capacity transit is an important component of the IBR program. How do you plan to come up with an equitable plan for enabling people to access that transit if built? Sorry.
So it's a great question. Both governors have given the mandate that they are committed to having a high capacity transit corridor that connects Portland to Vancouver. And that's going to be via the new I-5 bridge. So the commitment is there at the highest levels of state government. Our federal partners in the Federal Transit Administration have been right shoulder to shoulder with us in looking at options of how this gets done, as well as the Federal Highway Administration. So folks are committed to not having this bridge be only burdened by highway traffic. Having this be a multimodal corridor is the basis of this. And currently we are looking at 1/3 of the cost or of the investment will be towards high capacity transit. So this is more than talk. This is money that we're talking about bringing to this 5-mile stretch of roadway to make this a multimodal corridor. So it's happening. We are talking about how we can make this the most equitable, solid, sustainable, high capacity transit system for this set of circumstances around the bridge. So it's being delved into very deeply.
Thanks, Greg. I have a question for both Mr. Washington and Dr. Hunte, and it will specifically reference your involvement with both the Community Advisory Group and the Equity Advisory Group. But the question is one that I believe gets to the matter of trust in the notion that people's input and their voices are actually going to be heard and mean something. So the question is, how do you plan to allow the voices of equity priority communities to contribute to the IBR program? And can we actually believe those voices will be heard and taken seriously? So we'll start with Dr. Hunte, and then I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Washington.
Thank you for that question, because that's a big one, and it's one that people have asked me. And you know, I think that yes, this is where people need to weigh in. I think it's very critical that people do and do it in public comment, do it prior to the meetings, do it after the meetings, but weigh in. I think it's very it's critical because I think a lot of the what I hear is the way that people working on this project are looking for the Equity Advisory Group and the Community Advisory Group to give input, and are being influenced by that input as they are making decisions. And so really, if people have something to say it. Like, I think this is a discursive process. And I really want people to weigh in. And, you know, I mean, look, at the end of the day, what our electeds vote on is, you know, that has a huge impact, right, on what happens. But what gets in front of them is the work that we're working on.
Am I up now?
You're good, yes.
Okay, all right. My answer to both questions would be yes and yes. I'm surely not in the business of squelching anybody's thoughts. And anyone on the committee, and I sure hope that this is the way they feel, they have every right to express themselves, and I'm going to give them the right to do that. So no, there'd be no reason for me not to want anything but to hear from them. So
Thanks. So Greg, just reflecting on what Dr. Hunte and Mr. Washington have said, we're wanting to make sure that folks who want to provide inputs actually get heard. And as the program administrator, I'm certain that you would want to assure them that we are taking every bit of information that we're receiving under advisement and using it in the best ways that we can. Is that the case?
So Millicent, yes, we are. We have had over 29,000 different touch points with the community in this program over the last year and 5 months. This is one of the most robust outreach programs that I've ever seen on any type of program. So we are soliciting voices. We had a effort to get input to the program. We held it open because we did not feel we had enough diverse voices. So we went to our community-based organizations to have them find more people to give input to the program, more diverse voices. So this is something that we take tremendously seriously. And it's proven in the numbers that we are doing tremendous outreach to make sure that voices are heard and reflected in what we do. The Equity Advisory Group has helped drive some of the screening criteria for the design options that are being put forward. So the creation of the definition of equity was by the Equity Advisory Group. So these voices are not just there for window dressing. This is serious business that we're undertaking, and folks' voices need to be heard and are being heard in the program.
Thank you so much, Administrator Johnson. So Jonell, Mr. Johnson spoke briefly to the ways that we were reaching out and making sure that we were connecting. I know that your team made extensive efforts to make sure that those connections were made. Can you speak to that a bit so that people are aware of specifically what happened?
Yeah, and in fact, I want to give a shout out to one of my teammates, Salome Chimuku, who has done just a phenomenal job really leading this work. We've translated material in over 9-10 different languages, which is unheard of. Typically, government projects has maybe 2 or 3 languages that is translated, what's called a limited English proficiency plan. We went beyond that and developed and curated an LEP strategy specific to this project. We've held listening sessions in many of those same languages with those communities. We've created a low barrier small grants program that we've awarded to culturally specific community-based organizations who we know do a better job outreaching to hard to reach communities than we could ever do. And that's been wildly successful in terms of some of our outreach efforts. And we've been working real closely with our disability community and advocates. For example, you notice today we have ASL interpretation, and that's at all of our meetings as another way by which we ensure that we're reaching out. So those are some of the examples. And, you know, again, the way in which we define equity in the IBR program is both the process and the outcome. The process side of equity is how are we engaging the community? And you cannot authentically engage all of the community if you're not utilizing and deploying some of these strategies. And so it's critically important if we really want to hear from new voices, different voices, voices often historically marginalized and not engaged in these processes, we have to use some of these tactics and strategies. So very proud of our work in terms of that.
No, it's really been amazing. There's an opportunity for folks to see the outreach efforts that have been made. If you do go to the IBR website, look up community engagement, there's a full report of the work of the team over the past year that I think is really impressive and does speak to some of the things that have been mentioned here tonight. So we have one more audience question that I'm going to direct specifically to the program administrator, and then we'll get to the last round robin question. So the question is about the Biden-Harris administration's Justice 40 initiative and how the program is considering that as it works to engage community effectively.
So you have me at a disadvantage. I am not familiar with the Justice 40 initiative.
Yeah, I could speak a little bit to that. We've been tracking the Justice 40 initiative fairly closely, and we're thrilled when President Biden issued this last January, I believe, which I think sets a really robust framework with respect to environmental justice. It's really critical in terms of all of our work that we are advancing environmental justice policies. Some of what you've already seen trickle out as a result of this strategy has shown up, for example, in the Department of Transportation's strategic plan, which has a significant emphasis on equity and climate. And so we believe that some of the work that we're doing relative to focusing on climate as well as equity fits squarely within the framework of the Justice Initiative. And we'll continue to be monitoring closely in terms of federal funding opportunities as well. And so it's part of our overall thinking. And certainly we would welcome any recommendations and suggestions folks might have in terms of other things we ought to be doing within that context.
Thanks so much, Jonell. I'd want to highlight that one of the things that I appreciate about working on this program is that there really is a team approach, and that people are able to bring forth their expertise and their excellence in that service provision in ways that are complementary to each other. The program administrator, while he knows a lot, admits when there are things that he doesn't know, and he depends on the team that you see here and others that aren't on the call to really help to inform and to educate him and the program about how we need to move things forward. So what you just saw is what we see every day, and it's really something that's heartening. There's a supportive environment amongst the team that is exciting, and I believe is going to help us to move this program forward in ways, again, that differ from what we've seen in the past. Commissioner Hardesty, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to just add to what Jonell Bell said about the Justice 40 program, because it really connects our values here in Portland, right? Our values around climate mitigation, our values around clean transit, our values around affordable housing. And I have been looking at all the major transportation projects that will be coming down the pipe and saying, if we're not connecting housing people can afford to live into those projects, if we're not thinking about how do we utilize this project to actually create prosperity in communities that other projects have actually reduced the wealth in those communities, this is really a great opportunity. This is why I continue to push Administrator Johnston to say, well, but we're in a different world now, right? We know climate change is real, right? When we started this project way back when, under the last time, climate change was not so on the forefront of our mind, right? Clean transit was not at the forefront of our mind. And I think using every opportunity we can to get federal funding that is really focused on reducing the climate crisis and actually increasing multimodal transit options is in all of our benefits, right? And one other thing I wanted to say is, though there's a lot of community input on both sides of the river, I just want people to remember that we have elected officials from the region that will ultimately be voting on whether or not this project moves forward or not, right? And so it is important that you not just talk to Administrator Johnson or the IBR project, but you make sure that you're weighing in when the city council is deliberating on this issue, because we get one chance in a generation to actually do this project in a way that will be beneficial for generations to come. And so I wanted to add that before.
No, thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. Now we're going to go around really quick. Each panelist, we're going to give you 30 seconds or less to tell us, based on your professional background, your personal experience, and the experience that you've had within the Black community, why you chose to get involved in the IBR program. We're going to start with Jasmine. Sorry.
No worries. Just a second ago, I just was going to echo exactly what Commissioner Hardesty had to say. It's really important that we're putting the pressure on our elected officials for this bridge. But I'm going to use my 30 seconds wisely. So with my professional background, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm the HR director for YWCA Clark County, and really just my overall experience as to why I even went into human resources is really to create access for many communities, specifically the BIPOC community. And so given that experience, my personal experience of trying to be someone someone fresh out of college and trying to stay local and find a job that didn't require me to move too far from home. And just as also being specifically a Black woman, trying to find a pathway to a career, I'm involved with the IBR because I know how much access and resources impact me personally and impact my employees and impact my future employees and the community I serve the best. If you're not gaining equitable access, you are missing out on the pursuit of happiness. You're missing out on what you could really be doing to live, for lack of a better phrase, your best life. And so being involved with this is knowing that I'm helping to pave the way for those that are going to come after me, my current generation, and so on and so forth, while also honoring all of the work that was done prior to me just to get to this page. Because as it's been mentioned multiple times, other programs aren't doing this, and I value the fact that they are trying to do this. So therefore, I'm willing to lend my time to ensure that hopefully it's done correctly.
Thanks so much, President Tolbert. Dr. Hunt.
I think Jasmine kind of said it really. And I think the other piece is really like, if we're not at the table, then we get discounted, right? So I think we are integrally involved, and that is important, and needs to be our best and brightest and whatnot. Everyone needs to contribute from where we sit, because this is a collective effort.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt. Jonell.
Well, because we owe it to the generations that came before us, who were not around the table and were displaced at the hands of some of these projects. And we owe it for the generations that are coming up next, to set an example as to how you can be engaged and ensure that we are helping to advance a project and a program that is respectful and considers and authentically engages our community. So, it's really that simple. We cannot let other folks tell our story. We have to tell our own story. We have to engage our own communities, and that's why I'm engaged.
Great. Thank you so much. Commissioner Hardesty.
I'm required to, as my position as Commissioner of Transportation.
But I feel like you would do it anyway.
But I was paying attention long before I was assigned to it, because I knew that we get one chance to do this right. And what we do will have an impact for the next generation of Portlanders. And I just want to make sure that we do not continue to harm communities with these projects, but in fact, communities are able to prosper and communities are able to be heard before we break the first piece of ground.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Mr. Washington.
Yes, I think for me, it sort of goes back to what I said earlier, being in that meeting back in 1991. I thought, okay, it's still going, and I've acquired additional skills and input since then. So maybe I can be of a bit of help. So, and I'm supposed to. Yeah.
And our final word from our program administrator, Greg Johnson.
Well, first off, Millicent, I'd like to thank you for doing a fantastic job of facilitating this discussion. This has been tremendously important. I think when we talk about why, I think we have to look at the legacy of who came before us and who will be coming after us. And so for me to be here, to be a part of this program, it's about making sure that doors remain open for folks who look like me or who look like you, and making sure that we are leaving a legacy of inclusion, of voices being heard, and building a framework that other large programs across the country can follow to involve communities of concern, communities of color who haven't been involved before. So that's why I'm here.
Well, I'm excited to have been able to be a part of this panel, leading the conversation, but also allowing everyone's voices to be heard authentically. Looking forward to having more conversations. We recognize that February is Black History Month, but we celebrate Black History 365. And so this will not be the last opportunity that we have to come together. We recognize, however, that there are a number of different groups that have been involved with the growth of our community as we know it. And next month is Women's History Month. And so we'll be doing an observance of some sort to ensure that we acknowledge both the contributions and the work of the current team and previous folks who've been involved with advancing the transportation enterprise. It's an exciting time to be a part of something that is as transformative, potentially transformative as this project is. And so we just like to thank all of the panelists for taking time out of what we know are incredibly busy schedules and pulling away from your families. Tell your son that we said, thank you for letting us borrow you for a little while, Dr. Hunte. And we just want to let everyone know that if you have any questions or additional concerns, you can certainly email the program at info, that's INFO, at interstatebridge.org. Thank you again to all of the panelists. Thank you, Greg, for your leadership. And with that, our time here is over, and we'd like to say good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.